What is the evidence, not the proof, but the evidence that God exists? The evidence that God exists, I'll give you 11 pieces of evidence, okay?
So this guy has 11 pieces of evidence for the existence of his God? Well, needless to say, I'm a little skeptical, but let's hear what he has and see if what he's presenting is actually evidence.
First one, order and design point to an intelligent mind.
So that would be the teleological argument, and there's no evidence to support it, as we humans don't have access to a god and no access to any other universes to compare to. Ultimately, it's really just a result of humans projecting their own perspectives onto the universe itself. It is a philosophical argument, not a scientific one. Thus, it's not evidence.
Second point, the universe is eternal. No, it's not. There's a Big Bang. So the universe is not eternal. The universe has a beginning.
The cosmological argument fails as evidence because it is a fallacy of composition, assuming that because the parts of the universe are caused, it also means the universe itself as a whole is caused.
Third piece of evidence for God's existence, the anthropic principle.
The anthropic principle fails as evidence because it assumes that if the universe were otherwise, then there would be no life, when all we can actually derive from that assumption is that there would be no life as we currently understand it.
Point 4, the amount of information densely packed in the DNA of a single cell demands an intelligent mind.
This is just a version of the pseudoscientific argument from complexity, or intelligent design argument. It fails as evidence because depending on how it's presented, it's either an argument from incredulity, an argument from ignorance, or a God of the Gaps argument.
Fifth point. Sorry. I don't like it. Charles Darwin pointed out that if something is irreducibly complex, the whole idea of evolution by chance and fate falls apart.
Irreducible complexity is not evidence. It is another pseudoscientific argument that was popularized by Michael Behe back in 1996, and it's been thoroughly debunked and rejected by all of academia, due in part to our fundamental understanding of, and mountains of evidence for, evolution.
Sixth piece of evidence for God's existence is moral absolutes.
Moral absolutes are not a thing that exists, and so therefore they are not evidence for anything. While the vast majority of humans do have a sense of empathy that we've evolved, as that trait was very important for our survival over the past 300,000 years, morality is itself completely subjective, and the moral frameworks we develop from them and societally agree upon are arbitrarily assigned. All it takes is a brief look at the history of humanity to see that separate developing human civilizations had completely different interpretations of what is and is not moral.
Seventh piece of evidence for the existence of God is love.
Love is a many-splendored thing, but love is also the name we give to the strong feelings of attachment and bonding that occur due to the presence of specific hormones and neurotransmitters, most important of which are dopamine, norepinephrine, vasopressin, and oxytocin. Just because humans evolved a strong bonding emotion that we arbitrarily named love is in no way evidence of a god.
Eighth piece of evidence, is that where we're at? Eight?
Right.
Eighth piece of evidence is rational minds.
This is yet another design argument that a rational mind could not have possibly come from an irrational system. However, it has no scientific basis as we regularly observe order coming from disorder spontaneously in nature. This isn't evidence because arguing that human brains capable of what we call rational thought could not have possibly evolved is just an argument from incredulity.
Ninth piece of evidence. You as a human being have an innate drive for meaning in life. You're always attaching meaning to your life, so are we all. The only way there can be meaning is if there is a God who created you for a purpose. No God, life is ultimately meaningless.
Yes, it does appear that human beings do have an innate psychological desire to derive some meaning or purpose for their own lives. But this is in no way evidence for a god. It is in fact evidence for our evolution as a social species. Humans are social animals, and having a purpose makes us feel confident. It makes us feel useful. It makes us societally acceptable. But most importantly, it makes us more attractive to potential mates. Purpose is entirely subjective to the individual. Each person determines their purpose for themselves, which is far more valuable than any purpose dictated by someone else.
10th piece of evidence for the existence of God is the historical resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Unfortunately for this guy, the only accounts of the resurrection are the hearsay that was passed down orally and eventually written down by people who were not present at the execution. There exists no historical evidence of this event occurring as depicted, not to mention to believe such an event occurred literally requires an appeal to magic, so this is absolutely not evidence.
All right, here's the 11th one. For me,
Because
Because I've never seen life come from non-life.
Okay, so that statement right there was literally an argument from ignorance and is not evidence for any god. Abiogenesis can only happen once in a system because after it occurs, the elements that were involved become part of the food chain. So anything that formed a second time would be swiftly consumed by the life that already exists. Also, he may be subtly referring to Pasteur's law of biogenesis, which is not an actual scientific law, just a term Pasteur and others used to debunk spontaneous generation, which was this old idea that mice could come directly from moldy grain. So what this guy presented as evidence was really just a combination of philosophical assumptions, fallacious arguments, and pseudoscience, which means he desperately needs to recheck not only what he thinks is the definition of evidence, but also his epistemological standard. Be safe, be excellent to each other. I'll see you next time.